All right, so look, a lot of us that come here to talk about the 28th Amendment know what the major problems are, and we know what the solution is. Generally speaking, it's the amendment. How we get to that amendment is a very important question that I'll tackle a little bit later as we speak here. But what's amazing is the unanimity that we have in agreement on this issue. 96% of Americans believe that money is corrupting politics. 96%. That's the only thing that 96% of Americans agree with. I think only 95% agree that there are no lizard people secretly controlling us. Now, so what's of course amazing about that is that our politicians do not agree, okay? And they say that they are honorable gentlemen from Connecticut, honorable gentlemen from Nebraska, and they all have policy points they'd like to make, and of course it's one giant joke on us. Now, at least we can understand that because they get funded to say that they're part of the general corruption, right? So that's not surprising. What's interesting and amazing is how the mainstream media in this country has reacted to that. That they have taken what 96% of Americans believe and turned it on its head. And every day that you watch cable news, they tell you there is no corruption. This is an honorable gentleman from California, and he's telling you what his policy position is after a thoughtful debate that he had from the gentlewoman from Kansas, right? And they treat them like they're that they're actually representatives, that they represent their constituents, and that they are real and they're uncorrupted. And we have this kabuki theater where they go on television and they pretend to have a debate when we already know what the end is. You know, I do this prediction thing on the show on the Young Turks, and I'm almost never wrong. And it's not because I'm particularly clever. It's not because I went to a better pundit school. It's the simplest thing, and you all know it, and you've known it for decades. Follow the money. So whoever has more money will win. I say almost every time, but I literally can't think of a situation where they didn't win, right? So all this nonsense talk with the pundits on TV, oh gee, I wonder who's gonna do this and who's gonna do that and how the bill is gonna come out. Like, look, just find out where the Chamber of Commerce is, and at least on that rough metric, you'll be right 9 out of 10 times, right? So I thought that the media was in the ratings business, right? I was on television for 3 years, first on MSNBC, then on current television. Ratings matter a lot, and I happen to get pretty decent ratings, right? And the highest ratings that MSNBC ever had at 6 o'clock, by far the #1 show on current television. So I know how to reach people, but it turns out that that's not the most important thing. Because if it was the most important thing, you'd do something that 96% of Americans are interested in, right? And agree with. No, the most important thing is, where do they get their money, okay? So, and as previous speaker Jeff talked about, you know, super PACs might be terrible for the country, Leslie Moon has said, but they're great for CBS. And so the great lion's share of money of that political corruption is involved with goes to the television stations. So that's why they pretend that we still have policy debates, when in fact, not only by our estimation and the American people's estimation, according to Princeton researchers, we have almost no effect on policy. They did that research study on 1,800 policies, going all the way back to 1980. The American people, you think you have a democracy? And I got really bad news for you. You don't. It's gone. At the national level, we no longer live in a democracy. And that's not over a couple of years. That's not since Citizens United, by the way. They went back to 1980, and since then, the American people have had no effect on policy. Now, what kind of democracy is that? By the way, it's not like no one had an effect. The sets of people that had tremendous effect, and you see the charts that they lay out in their research, it goes like this, like total correlation is lobbyists, donors, and the elite. Because if you set up a system in a certain way, it's going to react in that way. If you say to corporations, make every nickel you can By hook or by crook, we don't really care. You don't have a moral obligation to your community. You don't have any of that. The only thing you have is we have designed this robot, and your programming is make every nickel, right? What are they going to do? It's the easiest, the most obvious thing in the world. If you were a CEO of a corporation and that was your mandate, what would you do? You'd go buy the government, because the government can kill your competition. It's so easy. Look what they're doing to Tesla. Tesla's enormously powerful. Owner is a billionaire. It doesn't matter. The other car companies have more money. In New Jersey, in Texas, all over the country, what they're saying is, you're not allowed to sell your car here. What do you mean I'm not allowed to sell my car here? And it's Republicans doing it. Democrats join far too often as well. But I thought you guys were for a free market. No. We don't. Free market. Free market. If we were for a free market, why did we do all those no-bid contracts during the Iraq War, who happened to mainly go to the vice president's former company? But isn't that amazing that you turn on television and they don't say no-bid contracts are by definition against the free market, by definition against capitalism. But once you start a corporation, you start corporatism. That is not capitalism. In fact, it is the opposite of capitalism. A corporation, once it is formed, immediately wants to kill its parents. Because their job is to eliminate all competition so they can make the most amount of money. What is the most effective way to do that? It is to buy off politicians to set the rules in your favor. Look, BP, they had the giant oil disaster in 2010, and American people were livid with BP, and Barack Obama got out there and he said, how dare you, by the way, 3 weeks before he said, how dare you, he allowed them to do further oil drilling, right? So that's the change we got. So I'll talk about Obama as we go along. Right? So it's not just Republicans. But you know what happened since 2010? I just read this recently. The Pentagon increased the amount of contracts they gave BP from about $1 billion to about $2.5 billion. That's their way of saying, hey, you go out there and make a big show about how you're paying the American government and it's okay, and you did a little bit of damage, but you're paying your fines, etc. And we'll funnel $1.5 billion to you through the Pentagon. Isn't that amazing? You think we have democracy? No, these guys rule us. So my question to you guys and everybody out there is, are you going to bow your head? Or are you going to rise up together and say, we're not going to take it anymore? We know what the Founding Fathers said. And Thomas Jefferson said, the real question has always been, will we have a representative government or will we be ruled by a small class of elites? That's what, of course, we rebelled against, a monarchy in England. And now, unfortunately, we're in the same place. Now, I do have some good news for you in a little bit when we talk about what we can do about it and where democracy still lives in the US. But to go back to the media, they are obviously in on it, okay? Now, and that's because when you set financial incentives, whether it's for corporations or in the case of the media, people are going to naturally respond to those financial incentives. If you're making hundreds of millions of dollars through this corrupt system, you will protect that corrupt system at all costs. Because that system is against all of us. It is not against them. They love that system. People wonder sometimes, hey, Barack Obama, his central promise in 2008 was, we are going to change the way this system works. So why didn't he? Why hasn't he done anything? Now you could say, hey, he's done X policy or Y policy, but why hasn't he done anything about changing the way the system works? Are you kidding me? That system made him president of the United States of America. He loves that system. It made him the most powerful and soon one of the richest men on the planet. He doesn't want to change that system. He can't get enough of that system. If he was a wrestler, his nickname would be the Establishment. Okay, so let me tell you two quick stories about MSNBC, both when they were conservative and then when they were so-called progressives, right? Back before Oberman started doing his incredibly brave special comments that changed the course of MSNBC and in a lot of ways changed the course of television and media in this country. And look, for those of you who don't know, I actually have a lot of personal issues with Keith Olbermann, but what you cannot take away is the importance of what he did, okay? And it changed the conversation. and it was fantastic. And I know for a fact that MSNBC fought him tooth and nail. They did not want him to do that under any circumstance, and he defied them in doing so. So being crazy has an upside. At the time they were conservative, before Oberman started doing that, and remember they fired Phil Donahue famously before the Iraq War because he wasn't for the Iraq War, even though he had their highest ratings on MSNBC, something I could relate to. Okay, so he had the highest ratings overall on the whole channel. But the story you don't often hear is about Ashley Banfield. Ashley Banfield also spoke out against the Iraq War in a very brave way in a speech in Kansas. She was the rising star. I don't know if you guys remember back before 2003, Ashley Banfield was everywhere. And she was clearly the next person who was going to be the big star of cable news. And she gives that speech. So after that, they immediately took her off the air, okay? But that's not the interesting part. I've seen that happen over and over. Her name is Ashley Banfield.
Ashley Banfield.
Yeah. But she said, okay, you took me off the air because you didn't like what I said about the Iraq War. Then, okay, that's fine. I guess you're going to fire me. They're like, no, we're not going to fire you. We're not going to let you out of your contract because we don't want you on any other station. And this is the kicker, they literally moved her office into a closet. She's like, are you kidding? Is this a joke? No, they're like, no, now you sit there and in your shame and humiliation because you dared to cross the establishment, sit in a closet for the next 3 years. And they did not let her out of her contract. Now she's finally back on CNN now. But that was not about Ashley. That was about sending a message. Now you guys didn't hear that message because nobody ever talked about Ashley Banfield. No, the cable news guys didn't talk about it, primetime news didn't talk about it because they're the ones who did it, right? The message was to everyone else working on news at the national level. And the message was, know your role. If you don't want to wind up in a literal closet, know your role and bow your head. And you don't get to be incredibly successful on television by necessarily getting great ratings. Sometimes that helps, depending on the situation. But you get there by knowing what gets you promotions. Speaking out against the government, speaking out against the corrupt system is not what gets you promotions on television. That gets you demoted, that gets you off of TV. Now, some of you might know this story, some of you might not, but when I was on MSNBC and I was hosting 6 o'clock, Phil Griffin, now this is at the point where they have switched to being so-called progressives, gave me a speech and said, hey Cenk, I was just in Washington and they don't like your tone. Well, I don't blame them. If I was them, I wouldn't like my tone either. And he said, outsiders are really cool. They wear leather jackets and they wear drive motorcycles. I was like, I don't do either one of those, but okay, God bless. He said, but we're NBC, we're insiders. And you've got to start acting like the establishment. I couldn't believe it because who would be monumentally stupid enough to say that, right? You're supposed to hint at it. You're supposed to be, clever enough to give code words, etc. And I'll leave this person's name out of it, but another anchor on MSNBC, once I had that conversation with Phil, then I went and talked to that person at lunch, and he or she said, I can't believe he was stupid enough to say that to you of all people. Right? So, and then they gave me another grace period to see how I was doing. So the minute he gave me that speech, I thought, well, it was a nice run. Right? So I then went on to attack the establishment even more. I remember one of the times that I had generally a progressive writer on, and I asked him, we got into a debate about whether Democrats are also corrupt. And, the Republican Party is, I don't know if it's 99% corrupt, 99.9% corrupt. But, Democrats, I think, unfortunately, are 80% or so. And they respond to financial incentives like everyone else. Yes, there's great people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, et cetera, right? And at the state level and the local level, there's terrific people across the country, terrific. And even some Republicans who are really honest and actually care about ideology and democracy, et cetera, right? But at the national level, they're mainly gone. Anyway, I get into this conversation, and I asked him to name 3 honest Democrats. And, he says Waxman. I said, all right, I'll give it to you. He says Markey. I said, okay, I'll give it to you, And then he says Chuck Schumer. Okay, I said, all right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I rest my case. And I got a talking to after that saying, hey, Cenk, we're all on the same team. And I thought, no, we're not. I'm not on that team. I'm on your side. I'm on the 96% of Americans who think that money has corrupted our politics, including, and most especially, Chuck Schumer, right? So this is, and then of course, I got, actually, once that conversation happened, I went more, as I say on there, balls to the wall. And my ratings climbed and climbed and climbed, and they got to the point where they said, all right, we gotta move you out, okay? We're gonna move you to the weekends, but we're gonna pay you a lot of money. So obviously you're not gonna say no, it's a lot of money, right? And we're gonna get to claim that we have a progressive voice. We're just gonna move you to a place where you don't do as much damage against the establishment. Now at that point he didn't say those words, right? But I asked him, I said, hey Phil, if I've been, good inside the building, like I don't yell at anybody, everybody likes me, is that right? He's like, oh yeah, everybody likes you, right? I said, are my ratings good? Is it best we've had? Yeah, okay. So, A, why would you move me to the weekends? And B, if you move me to the weekends, under what circumstances could I possibly move back into primetime? Because that gets to the core of why are you doing this, right? What's your real motivation? And I swear to you that it was the most uncomfortable 30 seconds of silence you have ever seen. He just changed positions a couple times in the seat. And the reality is he couldn't say why he was doing that move because we know why he was doing it. Because he'd already told me 3 months ago why he was doing it. So that's the state of media today. And that's at the best network we have, right? That's not the worst case scenario, that's the best case scenario, okay? So now, how do we solve it? Look, we all, a lot of groups, I love you, say we gotta raise awareness. What are you going to get to, 97%? Okay. Okay, quick raise, show of hands. How many of you think there is a problem with money in politics? Okay, I don't know if that's, maybe, yeah, okay, we got to 100%, good, okay. Awareness, check, okay. Now let's move on to action. We have to take action, okay. So now there's a lot of different ways to take action, but let me quickly tell you what I think are the issues and why I formed Wolfpack, right? I run TYT, the network. We got 29 channels. We got almost 2 billion views now online. And by the way, a lot of people say, hey, Cenk, good act of courage or whatever to leave MSNBC. Not really. I mean, you have to understand, I had options. A lot of those hosts don't have options. Their only options are you do as we tell you, or there's a closet, or the end of your career, right? Thank God there's a new media, right? Where we have options, where we have strength, right? So there's a lot of you in this room, but watching on the stream, over the course of the day, there'll be about 10 to 20,000 more people. And then when we put up the videotaped versions of this, there'll be at least another 50,000 people. So you think you're sitting in a mid-sized room in UCLA. No, you're sitting in a stadium full of about 75,000 people right now. So they cannot shut us up. It's a whole new world. So as I'm incredibly busy running the network and hosting our main show, the Young Turks, I started Wolfpack anyway, right? And 2 reasons. The initial one is the one we've already covered. Well, what else are you gonna do? I mean, if your job is to present the news to people, and you already know that the news is easily decipherable, whoever has more money wins every time, let's wrap it up, okay? I might as well talk about Britney Spears and Lindsay Lohan, right? Because that's it, it's over, that's what it is. And you can just do that on your own from now on, okay? Or we can do something about it, right? If we don't do something about it, I'm gonna have to stop the show. I can't do a pessimistic show. I can't do a hopeless show. I can't tell people there is no victory and you will be ruled for the rest of your life, right? I've got to be able to tell them this is how we can fight back, right? We've got that army, let's use it, right? So that was the primary purpose behind starting Wolfpack. But why the method that we chose? So for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, and you can find out all you want at wolf-pack.com. We've got the plan, we've got the amendment, we've got every step of the process, wolf-pack.com. We are for an amendment, and we are for an amendment through the convention process. Okay. Now, a lot of people think that we've never had a convention and that process has never been used. That's both right and wrong. Okay, so this is really important. I'll get to that in a second. Okay. As far as the amendment, now, good-hearted people who I love and respect think that you could get good bills passed through Congress. This Congress? You know, for the federal background checks, we had a 93% of the American people agree. Overwhelming majority of gun owners, overwhelming majority of NRA members. I think about 79% of NRA members say, let's do federal background checks. It didn't pass. If 93% of American people agree and you can't get it passed, it isn't about electing more Democrats or more good people. And how long do they last in the system? The financial incentives will overwhelm them, okay? They overwhelm, unfortunately, all of them, okay? So you're not gonna get a good bill passed through this Congress. If you get a bill at all through this Congress, I will guarantee you now that it will be a fig leaf. That it'll be, you know what they'll do? They'll take a good act that was mentioned before, the American Anti-Corruption Act, which is a good act, okay? And then Chuck Schumer will come in and say, let's compromise, right? And compromise and compromise and compromise, and we'll get to 5% change. And the point of 5% change isn't to make the system 5% better. It's to appease you so that you don't go for all of change. You don't go for real change. You go, well, okay, I mean, I got a little 5%. It's, you know, half of a loaf is better than nothing. No, it's not. Let's go for the whole goddamn thing. Okay? So, a bill isn't going to do it. Waiting for the Supreme Court, Justice John Paul Stevens recently wrote, as Jeff alluded to, that it's not going to happen through the Supreme Court. I mean, he was on the Supreme Court for about 35 years, and he said, you got to pass an amendment. You have to pass an amendment. Don't wait for us. He's not on the court anymore, which has made the court even worse. And as Jeff pointed out, a previous speaker, look, the Supreme Court thought that black people have no rights at all. The Supreme Court thought women had no right to vote, and case after case where the Supreme Court is not holy, they are actually human beings, and oftentimes put through the same corrupt political system and appointed by the same corrupt politicians, and they have been wrong over and over again. And we can go above their heads. In fact, we've gone above their heads in almost all of those instances. So, listen. Do you know that every generation of Americans has amended the Constitution? Yeah. Except one, actually. Us. That's right. Okay, we're the only ones who haven't done it. So, and I know it's not possible. I mean, how can women get the right to vote if they can't vote in the first place? That's impossible. It's impossible. I mean, they're slaves. They're slaves. They have no access to weapons. They have nothing. It's impossible for them to be anything but slaves. How many times have we been told it's impossible by the people who don't want you to try? That's why they tell you it's impossible, because secretly they think maybe it's possible. So no half measures. No half measures. I will not compromise with Chuck Schumer or Mitch McConnell under any circumstance. So, now, the last part of the puzzle is the convention. Why the convention? Now, there's two ways in the Constitution that you can get an amendment. One is through a convention, which I'll explain in a second, and the other one is through Congress. Oh, shit. So this Congress that can't even pass the Disclose Act, which just says, hey, keep on taking bribes, but can you just tell us who's bribing you? Right? They're like, no. They can, and, hey, when they first put it up there, Mitch McConnell and the Republicans filibustered it, so we needed 60 votes. And golly gee, the Democrats couldn't break the filibuster. Oh, no. Oh, when it comes to their appointments, somehow they get around the filibuster. When it comes to the Disclose Act and other things like that, oh, God, the Republicans twisted our arm. We couldn't get past the filibuster. So, but at least we had 59 votes. The second time it came up, 2 years later, it was down to 53 votes. The situation in Washington is not getting better, it is getting worse. You can't pass the Disclose Act and you're telling me you're gonna get 2/3 of Congress to push for a real constitutional amendment to get money out of politics, for free and fair elections. If they were interested in free and fair elections, they wouldn't have rigged the system in the first place. Again, why do they love that rigged system? That's the system that put them in power. They're not the best representatives. They're not the best policy makers. They're the best at taking bribes. If you change that system, they will hate it because they will lose their position of power. So the way to do that is to make them do it. So then your only option is the convention. So that's point one as to why I thought, when I started Wolfpack, that we must do a convention. Because I studied this for a long time. I went to conferences that Larry Lessig put together in Boston. I went to New York. I went and talked to constitutional law professors. I went and talked to Occupy movement. I talked to hundreds, maybe thousands of people to find what is the best path. Okay, unfortunately, the convention path to get the amendment is, in reality, what I discovered at the end, the only path. The only reasonable, realistic, practical path. But the other advantage is, it's also the most effective path. Now, wait a minute now. We've never had an Article 5 convention. Now, the Founding Fathers were unbelievable geniuses, and they put this provision in there, Article 5, if you haven't heard of it. They might as well have called it break glass in case of emergency. So what it is they knew, because of all the Jefferson quotes and the Washington and the Madison quotes, they all knew at some point Washington will get too corrupt. That's what happens. So you're going to need the state's help to get back your government, okay? And Benjamin Franklin, famous quote, it's a republic if you can keep it, right? And they put a provision in the Constitution to help us keep it. And it says you can call for a convention for an amendment, not for a whole constitutional convention, for an amendment to go around Washington. So you don't need Washington at all. So what you need is 2/3 of the states to pass a resolution to call for that convention. Now that is, again, good people that I love and that are good and smart folks that are helping a lot by getting ballot measures passed. That's a great first step. But when you get a resolution at the state level calling for a convention, that is not a suggestion. That is not, hey, pretty please. That's, no. 34 states pass that resolution and we're gonna have a convention, okay? There is no ands, ifs, or buts about it. It is mandatory, okay? Now, two things about this. Why is it most effective? Well, people think, well, we've never had an Article 5 convention. We had the original convention, which was not that, because obviously Article 5 wasn't written yet when they had the Constitutional Convention. They wrote the Constitution after, right? So that was a constitutional convention that's different, okay? We've never had a convention of the states for an amendment. So how is it the most effective? Do you know that the majority of amendments that we have right now were because of the pressure of a convention? That a convention was about to be called when Congress panicked. That's when they said, okay, yeah, sure, yeah, we meant to do that all along, right? So, for example, the 17th Amendment, best example of this, that was the direct election of senators. Now, those senators who were not directly elected, under no circumstances were they going to go for a directly elected system. They're like, that's not the system that put me in power, just like we have today, right? So how are you going to get 2/3 of senators to agree to change the system that put them in power? Well, we were this close to a convention for the 17th Amendment. We were, Elsa, was it 33 states? I don't,
we were one state.
We were one state short at the time, right? 32 at the time, okay? And so as soon as they saw that, they thought, we're going to lose anyway. We might as well pretend we're in favor of it, okay? So that's when they panicked and said, yes, of course, yeah, of course, direct election of senators. That's what I've been waiting for this whole time. 4 out of the last 10 amendments because a convention was imminent, okay? Now, I don't plan on waiting for them to get scared. I'm gonna go to the convention and I'm gonna see you at the convention, okay? By the way, mark my words on that, okay? All of you in this room, all of you watching, you think like it's a saying, it's something. No. One day, you're gonna see me at the convention. And you're gonna shake, we're gonna talk, we're gonna hug, we're gonna shake hands, and we're gonna say, remember when we said we'll see you at the convention? Here we are, okay? And we're gonna do it. We're already in the middle of doing it. And And it's 4 out of the last 10 amendments, like I said, because of the threat of a convention. Now, speaking of doing it, okay, so democracy's dead at the national level, so this is the last thing. Let's talk about where it still exists. Remember I talked about hope in the beginning and how democracy still exists? So what we've found through Wolfpack has actually been wildly encouraging, okay? So it turns out that when you go talk to your local representatives at the state level, they actually still listen to you. They're actually representatives. I talked to a woman in Maine who's a state rep. She runs the cash register at her local grocery store. She won with $250, okay? So she's responsive to the people she represents because she sees them every day at the checkout line. There's a guy, Tim Smith, who's a representative in New Hampshire, who's been a lion fighting for this. Won his election with $300, right? Is Tim representative of his people? Absolutely, that's what he's there for. There's not much glory in being a state rep in New Hampshire or, you know, Maine, Iowa, you name it, right? A lot of those people actually care. They care about our democracy, they care about their ideas, they care about you. And so when you go talk to them, it's amazing the stories that we get. I mean, look, Todd Jagger in Texas goes and calls his state rep. They wind up having lunch. You think you can't have lunch with your state senator or your state representative? You can. It's amazing. You call them, and oftentimes it happens. Not on the first call, not every time, but and he goes and has lunch with them, and he says, the state rep says to him, you know, it's a tough battle for you guys. You know, not a lot of people are interested in saving the wolves. And Todd says, no, we're not here to save the wolves, we're here to save our democracy. And the guy says, oh, then sign me up. So California Assembly has been terrific. You're going to hear from Mike Gatto later today. He was a real American hero in getting that passed in the Assembly. We got to go to the Senate next. And then in State Senator Delgado in Illinois was a lion for this cause. He's been unbelievable. But I wanted to, and we passed in the Senate in Illinois. We're coming. This is not theoretical, it is practical, okay? And we need your help. If you're gonna do any group to get real action, it's wolf-pack.com. So let me bring you to what Wolfpack did in Vermont, okay? In Vermont, when our guys showed up there, we were told by an ally, not a bad person, a great person, we literally have 0% chance of passing this in the Vermont Senate, okay? And we're like, oh. And they literally had a little conference, Mike and Salim and Sam and Ryan who were there. And they said, should we go back to New Hampshire where we also have a bill? Because we don't want to waste our efforts and misdirect them at the wrong time at the wrong place, because we only have a limited amount of resources. Believe me, we're not the Koch brothers. Very limited resources, right? And they decided, no, we're here. And even if they think it's 0%, we think otherwise, and we're going to fight, okay? So what wound up happening is they called in our army, our Wolfpack army, right? And what those guys across the country did was call constituents inside Vermont and say, hey, here's our situation, here's the bill, can you help us by calling your state rep, or state senator in that case, okay? Now that's so hard, because you're not in that state, you can't call the state senator, right? You gotta call the constituents to call their reps, right? Oh, it's hard. Okay, of course it's gonna be hard, of course it's gonna be hard. You know what happened? A guy named Walker in New Jersey got a hold of a reverend in Vermont named Steve Berry. And Reverend Berry heard him out, said, you know what? I think you're absolutely right. Lucky for you, I happen to know a couple of state senators. And he went and talked to Senator Sears and a couple of others. And Senator Sears was, you know, a great guy because he's open-minded. He said, oh, I'm opposed to you guys because I'm worried about a runaway convention, what we were talking about earlier, right? That everybody's scared, oh my God, if we have a convention, it's gonna run away. But in reality, we've had 233 state conventions at the state level. None of them have ever run away. Do you know that right now, there's 49 states that have called for a convention, but we don't have a convention? Why? Because it has to be on one issue. By definition, it cannot run away. It has to be on the one issue we called it on, okay? So Senator Sears was worried about that, but he heard Stephen Berry, a reverend that he trusted from his own community, and he changed his mind. Isn't that amazing? When's the last time you saw someone on TV, a senator or representative, go, oh, shoot, that's such a good point, I hadn't thought of that. Okay, I'm gonna change my mind. Never, right? Not in my lifetime, right? Democracy lives. Senator Sears then went and lobbied his own fellow senators. You know what the final vote was in Vermont? We passed it 28-2. How do you go from impossible to overwhelming victory? Because once you try, you know what happens? 96% of Americans agree with us. Once you bring it out into the sunshine and the spotlight, it's hard for politicians to go, 96% of Americans. It might be easier on the national level where they don't need us as much. On the state level, it's a lot harder. It's harder when your local reverend comes to you, your local doctor comes to you, your local constituent who's voted for you for decades comes to you. It's harder when somebody at the cash register line gets mad at you. It's harder when everybody in your district or your state is mad at you, because it's 96% of us. So yes, in the beginning it is hard and it takes a lot of hard work, and that's why we need you guys. Okay, have I mentioned that the website is wolf-pack.com? Okay. But once you get a certain amount of success, it becomes a lot easier. So, you know, there's a great story that Representative from Maryland says about how when he started running for office, they said his election was impossible. And right before the election, the same paper wrote an article about how it was obviously inevitable, right? So it's amazing how quickly we can go from impossible to inevitable. And by the way, the suffragist movement existed for a long time. But from the first protest that they had in the streets, where, by the way, they got spit on and attacked and harassed, from that day to their amendment was only 7 years. So we can do this, and we will do this, and what we're going to do is we're going to get free and fair elections back in this country, and you're going to be the people who did it. So as I look out to all of you guys here, what I see before me is the new founding fathers. Because every generation has amended the Constitution to get us to a more perfect union. So we might not have been there during the American Revolution, but we could have one of our own that is political, and maybe we're not the founding fathers, but we are their sons and daughters. And we can do this if we unite and get our democracy back, get free and fair elections back. And I'll see you at the convention.